Grey's Anatomy in particular had roughly 7 privacy and security violations per episode. So I guess it would be a great training episode, things to watch.
Hey, we should think of that.
Yeah. Can you catch the 7 violations of this episode?
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
In today's episode, we cover the new OCR Audit Protocol Review. Man, that's going to be some scary stuff. Oh, man. So before we dive into this, though, let me tell you that if you enjoyed today's episode, please go over to iTunes, give us a review, share this out on your social media networks, and I'll be sure to remind you at the end just in case you forgot. But what we're going to do in the next 4 hours, we're going to go through all 180 of these review protocols.
You're a funny guy.
Okay, so not so true, but we're not going to go through all of them. But we are going to kind of do a really quick highlight of what this is, because this is actually pretty important stuff. Because in order to know what these auditors are going to be looking for and what we're expected to do, the best thing to do is look at the audit protocol. And fortunately, they've released that, so now we can go in and look at what that is, how it's organized. If we get audited for any reason, then we kind of know what they're going to be looking for. So this is going to be some really great information that we've been waiting a long time to see. And before now, we've been kind of waiting to see if somebody has letters from the OCR that we can all photocopy and send around the web as to what they're looking for. But now we kind of get it straight from the horse's mouth. So I'm pretty excited.
Well, I mean, this tells you what they expect your program to be, And so more than worrying about the audit being audited or investigated, this is how you should build your compliance program. That's why you should look at it. This is what they would ask, meaning this is what they expect.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of stuff where you say, well, that's what I said.
Yeah. Or people read that and go, wow, you know what? I guess this kind of does apply to me.
Yeah. I would think so. Maybe.
So it's broken down exactly like HIPAA itself is, and in that it covers the privacy rule, the security rule, and the breach notification rule. And there's some interesting things we'll discuss along the way of how they've broken those 180 questions out and where they put them. Of course, they don't call them questions; they call them audit inquiries.
Yeah.
So,
because there's a lot of questions for one line item.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you want to dive in first? You want to dive in with the privacy rule?
Well, first I want to talk about what they said the general instructions were, because that's important to point out that there's some like 8 general instructions that tell you what you're supposed to do should you receive an audit request. And so it's going to say...
Number 1, freak out.
We should all freak out together. It points out that if the document just says entity, it means both covered entity and business associates unless it specifically states one or the other. So they're making a point of, business associates, you need to pay attention. The second part is that it refers to management, and when it says that, it's talking about the appropriate officials or person designated to implement the policies and procedures or other standards. So you're in charge of, you're the privacy officer, security officer, compliance officer. You're in charge of implementation of these policies and procedures and making sure that it actually takes place, which is clearly a definition of what they're expecting the security officer to be, or the privacy officer or compliance officer, however you have it structured, which is, it's not like, hey, Dr. A is going to be the security officer, and we write that down, but yet Dr. A doesn't even know anything about the security policies and procedures. Okay, you're going to have an issue there.
Right.
You're supposed to provide certain documents and items for review, not all of your policies and procedures, meaning don't try to baffle us with BS. Don't try to throw us a whole bunch of stuff. All document requests are for versions in use as of the date of the audit notification and document request. So
you can't create them as soon as you get your notification letter.
Well, you can, but you don't have to give me every version you ever had. But a lot of people are lucky if they have a version. And you can give it to them. They expect it to be done in electronic format at their portal, not to send them a bunch of paper. So they want you to upload PDF, a Word document, Excel spreadsheet, something like that.
And make sure that you go through the policies and procedures so that you've removed every place that says your practice name here.
Yes. And item number 6, I thought was very specific. So we're going to, exactly as it's stated. If the requested number of documentations of implementation is not available, the entity must provide instances from previous years to complete the sample. If no documentation is available, the entity must provide a statement to that effect. So you can't just ignore it. You've got to say, we don't have any of that. You actually have to include this page intentionally left blank.
Ain't got none of that.
They make sure that they make it clear that workforce members include employees, contractors, students, and volunteers. And information systems include hardware, software, the information, data, applications, communications, and people.
Oh, so people are part of
information systems since we carry around a lot of information, I guess. So those clarifications go across the board to all of the protocol, and then you have the list of inquiries that they're supposed to have. And so there's 180, as you mentioned, questions or line items. We're going to call them, I guess, line items, because in just a second you'll know why we say line items. So there's 19 breach, 89 privacy, and 72 security. So, at first I was like, I kind of expected security to be more than privacy based on the fact that they talked so often about, how there's no risk analysis and all these other things. But then I got to thinking about it. The privacy rule is gigantic, and the security rule is 8 pages. And so they got almost the same from 8 pages versus a giant rule. So it's probably, there are a whole lot, they're touching on almost all of the security rule, whereas not all of the privacy rule is kind of, I think, the way you have to look at it.
So percentage-wise, you can see the security rule is very important.
Yeah. Even though it seems to be a fewer line items, each line item will include a whole bunch of questions for them to ask, is what it is. So, then I pulled it and said, let's look at what portions of the law, 164.308 has 30 line items of the 180, and that is the security administration safeguards, security rule administration safeguards. So the number one number of things asked about is the area where it talks about the risk analysis and all of that kind of stuff. So it's where the most questions are most line items come from. And then of the top 10, you're getting the technical and physical safeguards. So everything else is on the privacy rule is focused on uses and disclosures and making sure you have the documentation and sanction policies and written policy, the administrative parts of the privacy rule. Are the 2 biggies of the privacy rule in the top 10. Everything else is all about the security rule. So that meant once you looked at those numbers, then you're kind of like, okay, well, that's kind of what I was expecting. So as we thought, and we've talked about before, a lot of particularly covered entities have for years done a lot of things with the privacy rule. They just haven't documented it well. So, that's a good thing, but also it's clear that they know that. So what they're looking for in the privacy rule questions, do you have the updated parts? Are you making sure that you're doing the work of compliance, which is all the questions about the administrative stuff? and then uses and disclosures where the patient, is under the TPO, treatment, payment, healthcare operations. So interesting that that's the focus, but it makes sense once I kind of went through it. So let's give people an example.
Okay.
Since security, administrative stuff is the biggie, I thought we would give an example of what a couple of those line items are. I think actually we won't even make it through. Well, let's see. Well, we knew that the conduct an accurate and thorough assessment of the potential risk and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of EPHI held by the covered entity or business associate. That's 164.308 A1II big A. Basically do a risk analysis, right?
Yeah, I've heard all this before. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what the law says. So what did you say that column is? The audit inquiry column?
Yeah.
So the audit inquiry column says, it's very long. And it does make a point of saying it's a required element. So does the entity have policies and procedures in place to conduct an accurate and thorough assessment, just, of all the EPHI it creates, receives, maintains, or transmits? So do you actually have a policy that says you are going to do a risk analysis evaluating the risk and vulnerabilities to the CIA of the EPHI that you cremate?
Yeah, if you might want to explain that one to new listeners.
CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, cremate, create, receive, maintain, transmit. Yeah, it's my little way of remembering it. So that's the first line, first inquiry they're supposed to, is do you have the policy in place? And a lot of people, they get the policy template books and it says that you're going to do it. So they can say, check, I've got a written policy. But that's just one, we keep going. We're still not off the line item. Has the entity conducted an accurate and thorough risk, blah, blah, blah. So have you done the accurate and thorough assessment of the potential risk and vulnerabilities to the CIA of the EPHI you cremate? So have you actually done it? You got a policy, check. Have you done it?
You said you was going to do it. Yeah, you said you was going to do it.
Yeah.
Now, did you do it?
Then the next says, determine how the entity has implemented the requirements.
How did you do it?
Yeah. So, did you do it? And if you say yes, I've got a policy and I did do it, now I'm going to actually look at what you did. I'm not just going to take your word for it. So I'm, again, still on the same line item. So this is just one of the 180 that we're going through here.
Not all of them at one time.
Yeah. We're still on one of a line item, a single line item. Obtain and review risk analysis policies and procedures. So now I want you to actually see them, evaluate and determine if the written policies and procedures were developed to address the purpose and scope of the risk analysis, workforce member roles and responsibilities, management involvement in risk analysis, and how frequently the risk analysis will be reviewed and updated. So let's look at the actual details of what's in your policy and your procedures to make sure that it says all the stuff, not just we're going to do a risk analysis. It's supposed to give you a little bit more meat, so to speak. Then it goes on to say, obtain and review the written risk analysis or other records that document that an accurate and thorough assessment of the risk and vulnerabilities has been conducted. And evaluate, it's still going, evaluate and determine whether the risk analysis or other documentation contains a defined scope that identifies all of its systems that cremate EPHI, details of identified threats and vulnerabilities, assessment of current security measures, impact and likelihood analysis, and a risk rating. So that's all your risk analysis needs to include.
Yeah, and all that's what we've talked about for a long time.
What's
Anyways,
in a risk
nothing new
analysis?
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is to say you've got to identify where all your PHI is going and all the systems. And what identified threats and vulnerabilities? Well, we talked about having a big list of those. And your current security measures. How are you doing with that? So impact and likelihood. And often you have people that just blow by that impact and likelihood as if it's something, But anyway, that's a discussion on risk analysis, but we're still going. We're not done yet.
As you read through that, though, it almost, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it almost sounds like if you read between the lines, they're saying this stuff needs to be applicable to your business and not some generic template that you got somewhere.
Right.
Not that those can't help, but it almost sounds like they're going, look, you've got to make this apply to your business, not just some general thing.
Yeah, that's one of the things when we do the risk analysis and we have the list of threats. And, we're just always maintaining a list of threats. Anytime some new breach comes out, we're like, oh, man, we don't have that on our threat list. Or, something happens and you read about something new or you think about something, we add it. But we always sit down with them and say, now we need you to review this list of threats and see if there are any that we need to add specifically for your environment. Like if you're at the end of, that's my favorite one, if you're at the end of a street, dead ends right in front of your office, and it's at the bottom of the hill, and people are known to drive too fast down the hill and slam right into your front window, that's a threat. Car accident, a car driving into the building, that is a threat. Okay. Or you're in the flight path at the airport and things fall off a plane into the, it's a thing. Put it down so that you say you've thought about it. But as we continue on the same line item, which we haven't left yet, the one item out of 180, obtain and review documentation regarding the written risk analysis or other documentation that immediately preceded the current risk analysis or other record, if any. Now, think about that. I don't want to just see your current one, but I want to see what you had before this.
See what changed.
Right. Evaluate and determine if the risk analysis has been reviewed and updated on a periodic basis. So your policy is supposed to say that you're going to do that. Have you been doing it? Because I should see changes, an update periodically in response to changes in the environment and or operations, security incidents, or occurrence of a significant event is what it says. So we're almost done with this one line item. We have one more thing that you're supposed to do, which I think will apply to a lot of people. I know we experience it. If there is no prior risk analysis or other record, obtain and review the two most recent written updates to the risk analysis or other record, if any. Wait, what? What it's saying is if you don't have another risk analysis, at least find out how many times you've changed the one you have. Which if you just did it, I'm not saying, I'm just saying. We're almost done. If the original written risk analysis or other records have not been updated since they were originally conducted and or drafted, obtain and review an explanation as to the reason why.
Yeah.
We're done with that line item. That's just the one thing on risk analysis. And, it's not like that one's huge and everything else is small. Because the very next one is on the sanction policy. So, a lot of the people that are in a small environment, we don't have a sanction policy. If somebody does something wrong, we just deal with it. Yeah, well, you got to write that down because now you're talking about legal stuff, and the law says you got to have a sanction policy. And so this next line item is just about sanction policies, and it takes the same approach. You have policies and procedures in place that apply when you fail to comply with the security policies and procedures. Yes. Does the entity apply appropriate sanctions against workforce members who failed? So do you actually do it? I have a policy, but I have no records that I've ever sanctioned anybody. Really?
It reminds me of that episode of Grey's Anatomy I saw. This lady was like, I should fire you for that privacy breach, but I won't this time.
Yeah, I won't do it again. I won't do it.
We'll just act like it didn't happen.
Right. Yeah. All those medical shows never discuss that. You never see HIPAA discussions.
Yeah, they're horrible. I think you and I discussed this before, but I'd read an article somewhere where it said that Grey's Anatomy in particular had roughly 7 privacy and security violations per episode. So I guess it would be a great training episode, things to watch.
Hey, we should think of that.
Yeah. Can you catch the 7 violations of this episode?
Well, you know what? That's what we need to do. We're going to have to write a script and we'll act it out of our own. But, I think they could create some drama just over making decisions on the privacy. When you sit down and you're talking with some of these specialists where they're dealing with kids, whether it's peds or even OBGYN, because the daughters are going in, and boy, is it complicated what they have to do to figure out what you can and cannot tell people. And you got the divorce and the stepmother, and then now that one's not the stepmother anymore. There's another stepmother, and that kind of stuff. It gets crazy. I think we could create some cool drama on that. There would be an entire 1-hour episode just trying to make one decision, I think. But anyway, we're still on line item number 2.
We'll stay on podcasting for now.
Yeah, no, really.
Create a drama show.
HIPAA drama. Da da da. It's gonna be like a soap opera.
Yeah, just go to some LinkedIn forums if you want some HIPAA drama.
Oh my God. Indeed. So back to our line item number 2. So do you have a policy and procedure? Can you show you are actually using it? Do you actually use it? Yes, we bought the template. Okay, so does everybody understand it? Oh, we haven't ever put that in a training class. No one even knows we have it. So then the next piece is obtain and review documentation of the sanction policy and procedures, which could be an aspect of a larger code of conduct, because it can be, built into the company code of conduct and the workforce manual. People put it in those big employee manuals sometimes. Evaluate if they contain a reasonable and appropriate process to sanction workforce members for failures to comply with the entity's security policies and procedures. And then you get a great little list, which is more or less the checklist that you should go back and compare your sanction policy to. Elements to review may include, but are not limited to, you can tell lawyers wrote this, personnel involved in the sanction process, required steps and time period, notification steps, reason for the sanction, identification of the sanctions applied to compliance failures, and documentation of the sanction outcome. So that's what they're looking for to prove you are actually using a sanction policy. You should see those elements in the documentation of your sanction activity. And then obtain and review documentation demonstrating sanctions against workforce members. Evaluate and determine whether appropriate sanctions were applied for workforce members that failed to comply with the security policies and procedures. So I want to see documentation. I'm going to look at the elements of the documentation that says you actually have a sanction policy that you are applying, and then I'm going to read through what the person did and see if you applied it properly.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah. So we made it through 2 line items. So you can see clearly that, there's 180 line items, but there's not 180 questions. I mean, we probably hit, 8-10 questions on each line item there?
Yeah. So during the audit, I mean, are the auditors going to go through all 180, or do they kind of pick and choose depending on what they run into, or do you know the answer to that?
Well, first of all, some of the policies and procedures wouldn't apply because, there's policies and procedure requirements for health plans that are different, that won't even apply at all to a provider or a business associate necessarily. So those will be tossed out. And then there's others that won't apply. Like if you're a hybrid entity or a multi-type entity where you could be both a covered entity and a business associate, and you have multiple elements within your business, these are the things you're supposed to do. Okay, well, those would get thrown out unless they apply. So a lot of that stuff will get thrown out. But as far as anything I've seen, this entire list will be what it'll go through.
Okay.
So the fact that you have 200 audits that will be done, and they're starting with desk audits. So I don't know, on the desk audits, will they ask for the first, 2 pieces, and then an on-site audit, they dig down and actually review everything. You know what I mean?
Right.
They haven't made that clear. But for me, I'm not so much worried about the audits as using this tool to tell me what they expect me to do in my compliance program.
Right.
So
'Cause that's been a big mystery to a degree for a lot of people.
Well, I mean, it's still a mystery to a lot of people, even when I give them this. So they're like, that doesn't apply to me. Okay. But clearly, everybody says, well, what do they want me to do? Well, right there it is.
Yeah. Or the one I hear all the time is, HIPAA is so vague, we just can't follow any of it.
Well, yes and no. Here you go. Read this.
Yeah. It's not that it's vague in most cases. It's that it gives you some guidelines and then gives you the ability to use what's reasonable and appropriate to apply to you. That's a whole lot better than them saying you must do A, B, C, D, E.
Well,
and you must use these things to get there. And you must pay for these products and services to get there.
Well, the reason that it has such flexibility is because it covers the entire healthcare industry. And you have to really understand how massive the United States healthcare industry is. It's like a third of our economy or something. And so for it to apply against all of those, everything from a single person operation all the way up to these massive corporations, that it has to apply. Otherwise, you're going to have, okay, well, I got to have 20 different HIPAA rules, laws, and you got to figure out which version applies to you. That's not going to work. So it's written in a way that allows it to work across that entire industry. And then you're supposed to figure out how to implement it in yours. It's not, everybody compares it to, PCI. It's not PCI. They compare it to things like some of the OSHA stuff. I mean, you have a checklist and you have a response plan to a certain safety issue, and that's cut and dry, If you spill this particular thing, run like hell. That is a very specific thing that you can do. And when you look at privacy and security, there's no such thing as those specifics when you look particularly at the amount of data that flows around a healthcare environment.
Then you throw in the business associates and it's even more fun.
Well, and the fact that, you look at most business, like you look at banking or, the financial industry as a whole, it's transactions, right? It's just transactions of money moving around, right? Mostly coming out of my pocket and going to everybody else's. And so you look at healthcare, there's money, there's treatment, there's guidelines, there's diagnosis, there's, different quantities of drug dosages, there's what does my plan cover, referral notes. I mean, it's a massive amount of information. It's not just money. And so the data, and I'm oversimplifying the financial thing. Don't start telling me I'm wrong. Financials is complicated. I know, I oversimplified it. However, it's primarily financial transactions. There's some documentation, but it's generally scanned images, signatures, contracts with digital signatures. That's it. And it's not at all like the amount of data that just absolutely flies around the healthcare industry because everybody's got to have a piece of the pie. So that's all I have to say about that. But clearly, the plan that we have, I mean, we've already started going through the audit protocol to firm up, specific things like, does your sanction documentation include all of those things?
Mm-hmm.
The very specific things. And let's look at your risk analysis. Show me your previous ones. I was just reviewing one, a new client the other day, and their last risk analysis said that you were going to do a risk analysis by May 1st, 2013. Did you do that? And somebody's blinking. They're just blinking, looking at me. Blinking. Like, are you seriously asking me this question? Because I don't even know how to do one. The last consultant said, if what you have here is weak and you need to do a better one. But it didn't say, here's how you do a better one.
Mm-hmm.
And so that went well. I got to say, I got this. So
yeah.
I think you're going to see more and more people start to get it because now it's very specific.
Yeah. And it should be easy for them to use this to do like mock audits if they wanted to.
Yeah, we're not going to do like a full mock audit. That would be hugely expensive because, clearly there's a lot of work involved in those line items. But what we're going to do is those areas that we know are going to leave you wide open. So those top areas that I was talking about, the uses and disclosures and the administrative stuff and all of those, the bigger areas, we're going to kind of focus on those areas and do some mini mock audits. Maximum, minimum, mini, maxi, mini. But we're developing that right now. But I can't imagine doing a full one. I don't. I suppose I could, but that to do that audit, auditors have to be just willing to sit quietly and read a lot.
Yeah.
And I can do that to some extent, but eventually I'm going to need to not.
Mm-hmm.
So are you going to start doing them, David?
I'm going to refer them to Card and Compliance.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No, I usually do the micro audits.
Yeah.
The nano audits. That's what I do.
Yeah. It's so small you don't even know it's happening.
I just look around and go, yeah, you need some help.
Yeah.
I know if I dig any further, it's going to get nasty. Because, we talked about this before too. You can walk in, there's certain things to look for that's going to give you indicators that other things are probably going to be bad.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's kind of, what we do is in the IT company is we kind of walk in, we look for certain things that we know we can find without digging into patient information. And they're pretty accurate indicators that there's things that you haven't done that you should do. And there's a few questions we can just ask. And in most cases, it's, we need to get somebody in here to help you.
Yeah.
So we don't have to go do the full or the mini. We just do the nano.
Well, that's my thing is you walk into a provider's office and it's really easy indicator. You look around, you don't see an MPP posted anywhere, and you walk up to the front desk and say, hey, can I see a notice of privacy practices? The look on their face in a response to that will tell you more about the compliance program than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Or ask them anything about their documentation.
Well, yeah. I mean, I always say that it's really easy to determine if it is, you can see the level of the compliance program. If you can go into any office anywhere that's supposed to be doing HIPAA, and I can tell you with asking 3 questions and everybody in the office should be able to answer these 3 questions, at least in some manner, not guessing, not looking at somebody else for the answer. They should all know it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Question number 1, do you know who your compliance officers are? Privacy, security, whatever. You should know who they are. Be able to name them, know how to get in touch with them. Question number 2, do you know how to identify a potential breach of PHI? Now, that gets a lot of things in that one little question because they have to know what PHI is. I'm not going to tell you. and a potential breach. They have to know what that is. Some people think if they get up and walk away from their computer without logging off and go across the room, that's a breach. It's not really. You're looking at the computer. No one's around in the office. You're good. And then third, if you know who your compliance officers are and you know how to identify a potential breach of PHI, third is what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
If you do see what you think might be one, what do you do? You can go in and ask those 3 questions. Anybody in the organization is supposed to be able to answer those 3.
You forgot the 4th question.
Oh no, what?
Can you properly spell HIPAA?
Yeah, that's always fun. Well, I heard somebody say that, I think I said that the other day, that somebody said that person sent in a resume talking about all of their HIPAA qualifications and misspelled HIPAA all the way over it. I'm like, impressive. You know how I feel about that. It's not HIPAA, it's hip.
Yeah, I think they got messed up when people started using hippopotamuses to.
No. Those hippopotamuses in a tutu.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You see that everywhere.
So the things we talked about so far are mostly privacy rule stuff.
That was
They're
security.
also going security rule stuff. Sorry, administrative part. Keep me straight here.
It's a tough job.
I know. But they're going to, they're also going to look at the breach notification part of it.
Yep. There's breach notification. Here, I'll give you a, let's see. Here is a privacy short one. Refraining from intimidating or retaliatory acts. And there's only 3 pieces that they ask about that. But still.
Taking all the fun out of the workforce.
That one line, you can't, retaliate. What up? Has the covered entity implemented policies and procedures addressing the prevention of intimidation or actions against an individual? You can't, fire somebody or make their life miserable just because they filed a complaint. You say, do they have it? And then if they do, then you say, I want to see what policies and procedures are in place. And then I want to see how you've conveyed that to the workforce. I want documentation on how you've made sure that the workforce knows you're not going to do that. So that's just one line item in privacy. And of course, there's how you handle complaints and all kinds of other stuff. And then breach, it pretty much hits every part of the breach rule just because, it's not that long. Let me find a breach. You can hear my mouse wheel roll. Here we go. The timeliness of notification, which we all know about those kind of things. We talked about it before. And just under timeliness of notification, were individuals notified of breaches within the required time period, inquire of management. And remember who management is. Obtain and review policies and procedures for notifying individuals and determine whether they are consistent with the law, including providing notification without unreasonable delay and in no case later than within 60 days of discovery of a breach. Obtain and review a list of breaches, if any, in the specified period and documentation indicating the dates individuals were notified, the date the covered entity discovered, and the reason, if any, for not deciding to notify individuals, all individuals were notified consistent with the law. There's one line item on breach.
Okay.
So you can see, it takes the one element and then drills down really deep on, don't just tell me you're compliant.
Show me.
Yes. Prove it.
I noticed that they have a lot about your business associates and the contracts around that as well.
Oh, yeah. There is, when we look at the top sections of the law that it evaluates, the Security Administration Safeguards, number 1, there's 30 lines on that, 30 line items, we'll call it. So Lord knows how many questions. There are 22 line items on uses and disclosures where the patient doesn't have to agree, object. So it's the things you can do on your own. within reason, sharing with BAs and those kind of things. Then the privacy administrative requirements, the training, the privacy officer, documentation, all of that stuff, the written P&P requirements. There's 18 line items on that, and then you have 12 each on the technical and physical safeguards. And then you have 11 relating to BAAs.
Yeah, and they're pretty in-depth. Like one of them I'm looking at right now was talking about, has the covered entity come into the knowledge of a pattern or practice of the business associate that constituted a material breach of violation of the BA's obligation?
Dum, da, dum, dum.
Yeah, so there's several different questions about business associates and these contracts, but the overarching thing we're taking from this is that you have to manage your business associates, which I think is something that's not happening a lot.
Well, yeah, we've talked about it repeatedly, and it's even, I do a session on it. I do a whole, 1 hour long session just on managing business associates. And it's surprising what happens when you start asking questions. And so that, okay, so here's a question then, David. Let's say I have a business associate and they signed a BAA, but I am absolutely aware of the fact that they're not really doing any of the HIPAA stuff because they don't think it applies to them.
Mm-hmm.
They just signed the BAA because it's something you require, not something they require. Then would you say, and we're not lawyers, I know, we're supposed to say that, we're not practicing law without a license. There's a big question.
But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
So the question would be, is that a
breach?
Yeah. Does that meet that requirement? Are you aware a material breach? They're not meeting their requirements under their obligations. So, what do you do there?
You find another business associate.
Yeah. Yeah. But most people just say, hey, they signed it, I'm not worried about it. Or the flip side, I only have to sign that. I don't have to actually do it.
Yeah. Well, that's, for the newer listeners, I'm in the healthcare IT field, and the consensus sometimes, especially around the smaller IT companies, is that all I have to do is sign this document, and that makes me HIPAA compliant, or that makes me comply with HIPAA, not necessarily compliant. So there's a lot of people who think that, as IT providers are going in, and these doctors and dentists and all this offices are saying, here, sign this paper. We have to do this for HIPAA before we can let you work here. No, it's a little more involved than that.
Mm-hmm. It's not just something you wave a magic wand at. And here's another important piece that I say over and over. IT companies are in a unique position because they have to understand what they need to be doing to be compliant, like in their business, like most business associates. But if they don't understand what their clients need to do to be compliant, you're most likely not going to meet all your security rule requirements.
No, because all the technical parts of the security rule are almost, all IT related. And a lot of them, the IT person or company or whoever you're using, they're going to have to do a lot of that because you're just not going to understand how to get that information or what it even is they're asking for.
Right. So it's important for IT people to understand more than the average business associate, not less.
Absolutely.
But that's how, that's just our opinion.
No.
And we know about opinions.
That's the law.
All right. Well, I think it's time we wrap this up.
All right. Let's do this. So, everybody wake up. They're freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, all this stuff I got to do.
Yeah, they've already turned it off.
But this is, going back to what we said before, tons of great information. I'm sure that we'll have a link on our website page under this podcast that gives you access to the whole entire audit information so you can go through and look at it. But definitely take this information and use it to do a self-audit. You don't necessarily have to go through every piece of it all in one weekend or 1 week because you're not going to be able to do it. But, people should be able to take this and look at what they're doing and see where some of the holes are and go ahead and start making a plan to fix it. And it all starts with your risk analysis. So take that information and use it to help you out. So anyway, that's our episode for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, head on over to iTunes and review us. Give us a 5-star review. We'd appreciate it. Also, share this out on your favorite social media outlet and let others know what's going on here. Get some great free training. And you can always visit us on the web at helpmewithhipaa.com. We also have some other resources there. If you're interested in some courses, we have some course material for covered entities and business associates that we recently released. So check that out. And make sure you send us a note, a message. You can do that right there on our front page of our website as well. We might even feature your question on a future podcast. So for Donna and myself, as always, remember that HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.